As you're probably aware, different browser vendors and versions inconsistently implement HTML and CSS, creating many headaches for web developers. And this is most apparent whenever you take a look at the default style sheets that are applied to web pages before you, the web developer, apply any of your own styles. So in the past, Bootstrap has utilized the work of a library or a file called normalize.css. It's a small CSS file that resets the default styling that's added by each browser, vendor and version, in order to provide a better baseline upon which to create styles that are consistent then across all browsers. And so you can find this by just searching online, normalize CSS. This about page tells a little bit about what it aims to do and some of the background and kind of the difference between what he's calling normalizing versus resetting. So things like font sizes and margin and padding widths, these and a lot more are reset, or actually, as he uses the term, normalized across all browsers so that they're consistent. So the developers spent hundreds of hours testing and tweaking to make normalize.css a tool that's trusted by many different frameworks, not just Bootstrap, as well as different tools and websites. Now, Bootstrap 4 continues to use normalize.css like they did in previous versions. However, they also add some of their own styles for HTML elements for the purpose of creating their own baseline. And they call that combination of normalized CSS plus their own work, their own special sauce. They call it Reboot. And so you can see they have a whole page devoted to it and talking about what they did and their different approaches to styling and what they try to accomplish. And in a nutshell, they basically used rems instead of ems. They undid some of the resets that could be destructive in certain scenarios. So, for example, margins and fonts that were defined by the browser, but then overwritten by normalized CSS. So Reboot basically says, hey, on second thought, maybe we shouldn't touch that after all. And they also set page defaults for background color, for font family, and line height. So you'll see a dramatic difference between a non-style page and a page where Bootstrap's been applied without any additional styles being added to the page whatsoever. We'll do that in just a little bit here. And then they also did something here that I'm not really sure if I completely understand, or if I do understand, I agree with. And that is where they create a base font size on the HTML tag and set that basically equal to 1 rem on the body. So they set the font size to 16 at the HTML level, something I said that you shouldn't do in our rems discussion. So I'm curious to know what the rationale is behind that. Maybe I'm the one who's all wet and I don't completely understand the issue, but it seems like you're not really getting the benefit of rems and kind of undoing some of the value of leaving the initial font sizes alone for a given device, but whatever. Okay, so I'm not going to do much more than simply point to the GitHub repository here for Bootstrap, where you can see the actual Reboot source file. This obviously is Sass, not CSS. However, I don't think the real value of this is the code necessarily, and you'd probably need to understand a little bit about Sass before you can really understand what's going on here. However, I think the real value here is reading the comments and the rationale behind each of their decisions and what they're trying to accomplish with each one. So it's definitely required reading. Pretty interesting stuff. And Reboot is really just the first step towards talking about the topic of typography in Bootstrap. And so most HTML5 elements have default styling in Bootstrap that are merely enhanced by utility classes that will apply a little bit later. But just for the sake of comparison, I did something, it took me almost all day to do it. I hope you appreciate it here. And that is, I created what I'm calling the HTML5 quick reference. I probably could create a better name for it. But I essentially used every single element that's defined in the HTML5 specification, with maybe 1 or 2 exceptions, but not that many exceptions. It's a pretty large page here. And so, for example, and there are some parts of it that are only employed by certain web browsers. So, for example, there's this dialog HTML5 attribute, and some of these things require some JavaScript to be written to really see their value, and so I kind of put them here at the bottom. Then there's this details and summary HTML5 tags that are only employed by Chrome. Menu and menu items only employed by Firefox. So also, I couldn't even get the page to load up in the current version of Edge. So I'm not sure what the problem is there. I didn't take the time to like debug it and figure out what exactly did Edge not like, but every other browser, including Internet Explorer, was able to handle it. So whatever. But at any rate, let's go ahead and take a quick look at it. And so this is the default version of the page with no styles applied whatsoever. In other words, we're using the default style sheet in Google Chrome. And just for the sake of comparison, let's pop open Firefox and do the same thing. All right, and so they're going to be similar, but you're going to notice, if I can get them close here, there will be some small differences in terms of like line spacing and things between the browsers. But for the most part, they look pretty similar at the top, and then they get a little bit more different as you go down near to the bottom. But at any rate, the real point of this is not to compare browsers, but rather to compare the default style sheet for a given page versus a page where I only applied Bootstrap. I didn't actually apply any special Bootstrap classes, just added the Bootstrap reference in the head section. And so, you can flip back and forth between these two and kind of compare what they look like. So clearly one of the big changes is the use of a sans serif font. You'll see that there's less spacing in between each of the individual H1 tags, or rather the header tags. There's different colors being used, for example, for the marked text, a bright yellow versus a more subdued yellow. As you go down further into this, you'll see some differences with regards to, let's see, like some of the special tags like the code tag, which we'll look at here in a second. The meter and the progress looks just about the same, a little bit more larger in the newer version of the page. That might have something to do with the setting of the body to 16 pixel font. And so tables will look a little bit more clean here in the Bootstrap version. And the text boxes and the form elements don't look all that great here, honestly. However, we'll see that we can clean those up with some specialized classes in a couple of videos from now. And that's pretty much it. There's not a lot else here. You can play around with some of the examples and look at the source code for those given HTML5 elements. But I thought that this would be a useful tool to see exactly what the changes were that were being made in the reboot.scss, and then compare them and look at them in a given browser to see how that they manifest themselves there. So we'll actually wind up using parts of this HTML5 elements plain.html page going forward as we apply specialized Bootstrap classes to the various tags, and to see what some of those utility classes will do for us in styling up just the basic HTML5 elements for typography and for forms and for tables and things of that nature. Okay, so let's go ahead and stop there, and we'll continue on in the next lesson by talking about specialized typography classes, and we'll pick it up then. Thanks.